Hello.
Hello, can you hear us okay?
Yep. Yep. I could hear and see you.
Excellent.
Cool. I had to swap around a few links and stuff to get going, but yeah, awesome.
No problem. Us too. So maybe we can start with quick introductions, and then we'll have a brief presentation and mostly just want to have a conversation about this pattern lab in production concept.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I certainly am not prepared for anything. So yeah, yeah, I was happy just to chat and hear what you're all up to.
Cool, totally. Well, maybe we'll let you do a quick introduction. You're Brad Frost, the creator of Pattern Lab. So for anybody who watches this recording, maybe give us the elevator pitch about like what's Pattern Lab for people who haven't heard of it.
Ha! Yeah. So a couple years ago, I guess I was looking for ways to make more modular sort of front end designs, I guess. And so that sort of led to this idea of sort of what's essentially just began as like nested includes, right? Like little patterns included in bigger patterns, included in even bigger patterns, and that sort of yeah, that sort of led to the creation of Pattern Lab. But I'm not a very good programmer, so Dave Olson, who is a friend and down at the web team at West Virginia University, he sort of came on board. I showed him what I was working on, and he took it and actually turned it into real software that people can use now. I would not have been able to do that on my own. So huge thanks to Dave for actually like making it real. And so yeah, so Pattern Lab is this sort of I still have a hard time explaining it. It's a way to create very deliberate UI design systems, and it gives you a couple different tools and sort of features to help you stitch all this stuff together. But yeah, that's like at its core, it's just sort of stitching these patterns together, and also gives you the ability to, which I'm sure you guys will talk about, to sort of swap out, you know. Or sort of pour in real representative content, or in your guys' case, like real content, into those patterns, so that you have this living, breathing design system that reflects the kind of content that you put into it. So yeah, that's maybe a little long-winded for an introduction, but that at its core is what Pattern Lab is doing.
Awesome. Yeah, totally. Okay, so quick introductions on this side. I'm Brandon. I'm the CTO here at Pixo. And our main presenter today is my colleague Matt Sharkey, who's a developer who's championed some of this Pattern Lab in production. There we go.
Yeah, I can see y'all. Yeah, yeah, you're good. You're good. Now I
Matt's
can't see you, Brandon.
okay. That's okay. Matt's championed some of this like Pattern Lab in production and how we use Pattern Lab and the workflow that we'll quickly show here and then talk about, and including some open source pieces now called Outpost and Lab Coat, which we'll kind of explain as we go. But Matt, do you want to say hello?
Yeah, hey. So we used Pattern Lab on a site that we went live with about a month ago, and it was, I think, far smoother than any of us thought it would be.
Excellent. Happy to hear that.
For reasons that we'll kind of go into today, but I mean, I think I personally wasn't prepared for how well it would integrate into the process, and it's largely because of this separation of content and design that we'll get into in a little bit.
Yeah, excellent.
Cool. And we're joined by a couple colleagues here at Pixo, Jason and Carmel.
Hey Brad, how you doing?
Hi.
I got to see a webcon. It was a really good talk this past
Oh,
year.
awesome. Oh, thank you.
Cool. So we're going to turn off the camera and actually let Matt visually take over the screen here and just quickly describe what we're doing and then do a quick demo of what we're doing. And the whole thing's a conversation. So stop us at any point along the way, Brad, and we'll talk about it and see what you think.
Sure. Yeah, awesome.
So let's see. Get this to work. Do you see a title card?
I see your logo.
Okay. let me see.
Did you click the green screen share thing?
Yeah. So I need to. Oh, there we go.
That's
How about that?
Oh, yeah, there we go. All right, cool.
Okay.
Oh, nice.
So this is the site we were talking about. This is the site for the University of Illinois at Chicago. It is a humongous university right in the city. And this site went live not too long ago, about a month and a half. We're really proud of it. We got to do a lot of things with this site that we had never done before. A lot of the work that we did with the design and stuff that we couldn't have done in a more traditional setup simply because we end up spending a lot of time fighting with our CMS. So lately we have moved into a space where we do all the front end work completely separate and outside of a CMS in what we're calling a decoupled space.
Yep.
We have a little tiny site that serves all the public, and we have the WordPress site where everyone logs into. What we notice with this site, like we see with a lot of sites when we start putting it together, is that there's a lot of repetition. And that makes it ideal for a style guide, and in this case, Pattern Lab. This site is made up of a lot of similar components that get repeated with a lot of variation. Part of that was due to the fact that we had a very compressed timeline. We tried to keep the design as minimal and repeatable and reusable as possible. But it ended up, for whatever reason, lending itself really well to Pattern Lab.
That's great.
We had, about 5 or 6 different core content components like this that were repeated in variations, and Pattern Lab let us do things like make small granular changes and see them repeated across the site. We didn't have to worry about, would this little change we made to this button break the whole site? Would we have to now check 20, 30 pages because of some little tiny change somewhere? It also let us deal with the variations in similar pieces of content, and that was something I wasn't prepared for. I knew what we would get out of the Pattern Lab interface in terms of being able to test on different screen sizes and different devices, but I wasn't really prepared for how much it let us test the content itself.
Yeah.
And it's, I guess, no surprise going through and reading your book. I can see that that was a big part of the impetus behind Atomic Design, and we used it all the time here. I mean, we have these on each of the landing pages of the site. We have a great big photograph and the a potential overlay. They can change the color, like you see here. There's a whole bunch of variation. In the style guides that we've made in the past, this would have been 6 different pages, and if we wanted to make a change to each one, we would have had to go in and make those 6 different changes. It kept us from really experimenting with, well, what do these settings do? And being able to see if they choose blue and pink, does that work? Is this, how is this going to break? Is it going to, affect things that we don't know about? The Pattern Lab being able to separate that stuff out meant that we were always pretty clear that when we made changes, we know what the repercussions would be. And so we could do stuff like this where from WordPress, they actually have the ability to update a photo and pick any one of these color overlays. And we don't have to worry about whether they know Photoshop and they can have to make these ahead of time. They can just go ahead and upload photos, pick these colors, and we can test them all out beforehand so that we know what's going to work and what doesn't.
Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah.
And this was kind of the motto, during the whole process, is just try to test as much different kinds of content, ideal circumstances, as well as the worst case scenario. And so for every single one of these elements, we were saying, well, what happens if there's a really big headline?
Yeah.
We don't expect, or what happens if they shove a whole bunch of text in the button that we didn't think they would do?
Yeah.
What if they took out a photo and we didn't know that the photo was optional? And just trying to figure out how far can you go until you actually break this design.
Yeah.
And what we learned was that as long as we kept the separation of content and design, that we were always pretty safe. We knew that if we tested the right content and if it fit into the right design piece, that more often than not we would get the page we wanted. And this helped during the QA process because we can just test the site with a bunch of fake content, and as long as the content that's coming in from the site is the same shape as the test content, we can be pretty clear that when we move these designs over to the live site, they're going to work just as well. And like I said, I personally was surprised at how well we were just able to lift the templates we'd made in Pattern Lab and drop them into a live site, and almost entirely due to the fact that it forced us to make decisions about what the shape of the content was. And so going forward, we'll talk a little bit more about, we'll take a look at maybe demo a little bit of the code, but going forward, we are trying to think of as many uses for that content as possible. Like, can we use it to run tests on our live site to make sure that the content is the right shape for the templates? Will it let us know if there's a variable missing that a template expects, or if it's something we thought was optional is not optional,
right.
Something just the opposite. So there's all sorts of things that, because we know so much about the content, now we're just trying to figure out where can we use this. So that's kind of my part of this. If we want to,
yeah, let's do the quick maybe demo thing and maybe take a step back and just show what the moving pieces of this all are.
yeah.
So
we'll go in and take a look. I guess we'll screen share
I think if you do entire screen, then you can switch, yeah.
Okay. So we can take a look. Ooh.
Whoa, that's awesome.
Inception.
Okay. So over here we've got, this is our Pattern Lab for the UIC site. And the two windows in the back, we actually have Grunt running to handle all of our stylus stuff. And then on the right side here is Pattern Lab itself, which if I reload this, you can see all the busyness going on in the background. What we thought we'd do here is kind of show you the type of thing that was happening late in the process for us. And I think we'll go ahead and undo what we did. We had this little, on our footer, we have all our social media links. And let's say we'll do the opposite, I guess, of what we did before, which was, let's say they decided they're done with Instagram.
Yep.
And so they take it out here. They go in, and of course this will run.
Yep.
Our grunt task will run when the data changes and rebuild everything. When we go back to the Pattern Lab, it's there. Whoops, our stylus finish. So when we go back to Pattern Lab, we can see that it's so slow that it's gone.
Yep.
This template is now, this will go through QA, this little test. We'll check it, make sure it didn't break on anything, but the minute that we've done that, this is ready to deploy.
Right. What was really cool for this whole project was the front-end developers only worked in Pattern Lab, never spun up a CMS. So they never spun up the Vagrant, which has the WordPress instance in it, and that actually, serves up the site to public visitors. They were only working in Pattern Lab in the front end, adding, atoms and molecules and components here, just like this, and kind of test driving them with test content here to check them out. But then, as soon as they would check it in, the live site uses all those exact components, the pieces from Pattern Lab, to host real requests. So
right.
It kind of changed the workflow and let the whole front end team not have to worry about the CMS, a server, a Vagrant, a VM, anything.
Right, right, and that was sort of very much, I'd say, one of the big sort of driving forces behind sort of making this thing in the first place. Just because so static design tools are sort of cumbersome as all hell when it comes to trying to show these variations and stuff. It's just like too repetitious. Too you're having to triple or quadruple your workload just to sort of show, like you're showing these different sort of hero areas and stuff like that. So static tools are pretty rigid, but then at the same time, in order to do this sort of whole dynamic content and show variations and show sort of different instances of something, it would require spinning up WordPress or Drupal and setting up databases and all that stuff. And it's like, I'm just a front-end developer. I'm just making I'm responsible for the look and the feel, the UI of this thing. I don't necessarily need some heavy-handed, like full force CMS. I just want to be able to swap some stuff out. So that's awesome that you guys sort of agree. It sounds like you agree with that. So.
Right, totally. And maybe even a step further than that, like the front-end developers should be able to use their tools of choice and not just be limited to like making a WordPress theme or making a Drupal theme, in the CMS, but that they actually get to work outside the CMS in this whole other playground of their Pattern Lab laboratory.
Right.
Yeah, and I know, I mean, another aspect of this that was really nice was usually when we do themes for a CMS, you sort of start with the page and drill in.
Right.
With this, we were able to start with small elements, and we didn't need to have, Pattern Lab was the place where these things could be. We didn't have to have a page for them to live in. And we could start playing around with the small parts first and put them together. That was really nice to not be able to, usually I've been on projects where the first thing you do is just do the header, because that's at the top of the page, and work down.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think for us, though, the secret sauce for all of this are these data files that come with it, and this, once we sat down and determined what the shape of the content was, it meant that we could have teams working at a pretty steady clip, completely independently, because we knew that as long as the content in the Pattern Lab data files would match the content that we were going to be feeding into the templates on the live site, I think we really never panicked about what's going to happen when we switch over from front-end work in the style guide over to the live site. And also because of the repo, we were always pulling in the latest templates from Pattern Lab into the live site to check it. And every once in a while, now I think one of the things we want to do is see if we can go in the opposite direction and maybe get our CMS to generate some of these data files so that they start with something, from the CMS and then can work independently, knowing that it'll match up later on. So there's just a lot of really exciting things that we want to do on the next one.
Yeah, and I've talked to some folks who have done that, so sort of by default, Pattern Lab has just sort of, just a data file, and you just sort of say, okay, we're going to have some default stuff, and you can define whatever it is you want. And I think that's been one of the biggest advantages, I think, of using this tool is basically been, you're just working with data. And so long as a content management system can export data in a JSON file, then you could suck that into Pattern Lab, and like you're all talking about is that you could sort of go the other way with it too, from Pattern Lab into the content management system, provided again, just the data is in the right shape.
Mm-hmm. So maybe that's a good segue to really quickly showing that network diagram and kind of talking about the parts of what runs Pattern Lab in production for us.
Right. So this is kind of this is the repo that we have. I don't know if you're still looking at the.
Yep.
Okay. So Pattern Lab is kind of a first-class citizen here. It's right next to the public site, all the code that runs that. And it's a sibling also of our WordPress site. So we consider, we had 3 developers on this project, and those 3 domains pretty much it was one person to one section. Inside Pattern Lab, I mean, as you know, we did have to dig into the source directory until we start finding patterns. And I don't know if, I guess we'll talk about the arrangement of this and then kind of talk about, we've started to play around with arranging things a little bit differently for the sites we're going to do from now on. But these patterns are the ones used by the public site. We don't have duplication. We don't end up moving them when they're ready. I mean, the same files that generate the style guide are used to generate the live site. And I think one of the biggest advantages that came out of it was that the style guide never fell out of date. A project that we did right before this, as we moved the style guide into Drupal, we had to make so many changes to the templates to get it to work in Drupal that our style guide just was useless. And part of it was we had to cut out holes in the patterns in order to stuff content in. We didn't have the fake content to stuff it into or stuff in there on the style guide side, so they just lapsed. They were blank, just a lot of filigree with no content. So being able to do that with Pattern Lab gave us, I mean, up until the very last day before we went live, we were still, all of our front-end tech was still making all of his changes in Pattern Lab.
Yeah.
Never even spun up a WordPress site. So,
talk a little bit about the public site and that it uses this thing called Outpost.
Right. So the public site is using a piece of software that we built for these kind of sites. It's called Outpost. It is a very, very light framework. Because the sites that it powers do very little. They just have to, kind of like we were talking about, they get a request in, they get the right content, usually this is fetched from WordPress. They find the right template, they marry them together and send along the response. So Outpost is largely concerned with getting content from remote sources, trying to cache it and save those calls whenever possible, but then running that content through Twig templates, which in this case are set up for Pattern Lab. So, when you don't do a lot, you don't need a lot. And Outpost is fairly light at this time.
That's great. So Outpost is sort of sitting there in the public site directory, and it's sort of taking the output from the CMS and shoving it through the appropriate Twig template.
Right. So when a request comes in for, say, and in a WordPress site, the request would come in, and one of the first things we would do is we'd ask WordPress, hey, what is this URL? And it would say it's this post. And then we would get that post information. And then the next step is kind of taking what we get from WordPress and changing it. We have adapter classes to make it look like the data files in Pattern Lab. So pretty much all the custom code that goes on in Outpost is all about making foreign content look like Pattern Lab data.
Awesome.
And it uses the WordPress REST JSON API, which is I know it's going to be in WordPress core soon, but it's a plugin to WordPress that exposes all of WordPress's content in a friendly JSON format for consumption by Outpost or any other service.
Yeah, I mean, you can see so the source file is most of the custom code for the site. It's the stuff that we built just for this site. And it is almost entirely representative content. It's objects that represent things.
Right.
And so almost all of the work that we do when we build this page is we gather together content, most of it from WordPress, some of it comes from other places, but then we wrap them up in these objects, which Pattern Lab understands. And that was one of the other really cool things about using the Twig version is that we don't necessarily have to convert these into anything. We can make an object, and as long as it has all the right properties and methods, Twig will treat it just like it would one of those big JSON objects.
Yep.
So like I said, it was just at every step of this, we would find something that just worked better than I personally had thought it would. I think we get into the Pattern Lab part of this, we can start to talk about what we're doing with lab code a little bit.
Yeah, let me say one thing about WordPress first, just for a second. So, WordPress here is like another first-class citizen, next to the Pattern Lab and next to the public site powered by Outpost. And the job of WordPress in these sites is much, much smaller because WordPress is never viewed by the public at all. Mm-hmm. WordPress is only a place where the authors of the content go to log into at a special URL, like cms.mysite.com or something.
Yeah.
So,
right.
So WordPress can be lean and mean and do a lot more simply with fewer plugins and fewer complexity or fewer kind of upgrade difficulties over time, when the sole job of WordPress really is to be a great editing tool. Yep. That's a great place for people to contribute, edit, revise, update content, and then it just gets pushed out in the JSON REST API feed to Outpost and merged with the Pattern Lab templates. So it's nice to let the CMS do a really small, kind of decoupled microservice style job, something that the CMS is really good at. And we've done this with WordPress, but also with Drupal. And it's a lot cleaner to make the CMS do the part it's good at, but not have to be in charge of running your whole website and dictating the tools for how you build your whole website.
Yeah, and WordPress and sort of my background has been hacking away at WordPress themes and stuff, and it just gets so sloppy wherever you have this sort of, the PHP sort of logic, and then jumbled in it is some divs and paragraphs and whatever, and I never did like that, and so that's really cool to see that. But again, I personally, I love WordPress. It's just I just always had an issue with the fact that they never really had any really clean templating. It was always just sort of a big jumble. So it sounds like you're all solving that by sort of letting WordPress do its thing from an admin standpoint, so that the main interface, WordPress's admin interface is sort of what it's there for, and then you're sort of just taking the data out of that and then putting it into a cleaner system.
Yes, exactly. It's like on the screen here, this is the WordPress site, which really looks like nothing at all.
Yeah, this always cracks me up. You can go here. It's doing this. This is a thing that WordPress is doing. It just has no idea that no one is watching it do that.
Right. That's funny.
But no, I mean, all of my frustrations with CMSs have always been with theming.
Divitis.
Yeah, and just the kind of subtle arrogance of a piece of software that is going to make a lot of presumptions about the way that you want to build your site. And I think that once we did this, once we kind of removed a lot of the responsibilities from the CMS, I was amazed at how much more I liked it. I mean, instead of fighting with WordPress, you realize all the things that it does really well. Every single one of those things having to do with actually managing content and not presenting it.
Right. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. That's really, really cool.
Yeah, so I guess, do we want to move forward and talk a little bit about what we want to do next?
Yeah, maybe describe lab code and kind of the different ways of structuring repos and kind of wrapping up Pattern Lab with lab code.
Yeah, so one of the things that we ran into, and again, this is why it's really fun to talk to you, because there were things that either we didn't have enough time or we didn't have the experience to understand that the parts of Pattern Lab that did tend to get in our way. And one of them was the fact that the Pattern Lab code sort of surrounds all of the custom content. So in order to get into all of our templates, we have to dig into all of the Pattern Lab core and get into the source, which is still kind of mingled with some elements with the style guide. When we worked on a multiple developer system, what we found was that there was a lot of repetition. When we started using multiple projects, there was a lot of duplicate code in the repos. So one of the first things we started to look at was if we could move Pattern Lab to something that could be purely managed by a package manager.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing that we're doing with Bower and Node and Composer. And that was kind of the genesis of lab code, is that lab code is, and let me pull up just while we're talking.
Yeah, maybe pull up the website and tell us.
Whoa, we're back to the infinite scroll.
And tell us kind of what your definition of what lab code is to the world.
Where did we put that? Remember? Let's do this. Oh, let's just pull it up again.
Yeah.
So, right. So lab code is our sort of Pattern Lab library that we've been using on the next set of projects that we're working on.
But it's totally open source and like free here on GitHub for anyone to use and contribute. So it's not really ours, but we started it. And
yeah. We needed something that was a little bit more streamlined. I think a lot of the pattern including syntax, which is in the, I think maybe primarily the mustache version, we didn't need the amount of fuzzy matching that was available. So we were pretty strict about how you could include patterns, and what that let us do is make a Twig template loader, which was a lot faster, because it really just, there's two ways to name a pattern. You can either use the partial syntax or you can use the path syntax, and we were able to make something that could cache that really quickly. We ended up speeding up pattern generation. It's something that is in packages now, so we can pull it in that way. And we're still cleaning it up for a 1.0 release. But the other thing we can do, and again, this gets back to the kind of interesting things we can do with content, is lab code, in a certain sense, it kind of makes a representation of a pattern lab. So when you spin it up, you tell it where pattern lab lives, and it gives you back this lab code object, which is a pattern lab object. And you can interrogate it and ask it questions just like a regular object. You can find out how many types there are, what are the subtypes within those types. This was really useful for us because then it allowed us to dig into specific data. And we can say, for instance, when we get down here into testing, we can start validating things. So if we have an event and the event has these 4 properties, and in production we have an event class and it has a property, but it also has a method which will map to one of those properties, we can run our tests on these and say, given this pattern lab, I want to make sure that this variable right here, pattern and hash and the name of it, matches up with this class name. And then when we run it, it'll tell us something like this. It found almost everything except, you don't have a time.
Yep.
And you need to go back and you need to add something that maps to the time variable in this event.
Yep.
And what that'll let us do is do a lot more automated testing on content. And that's really, I think, the stuff that kills our QA department, is every single change to the front end has to be QA'd by hand, by eye.
Yep.
Being able to sort of take that to the place where we can turn it over to machines is, I think, going to be something that'll save us a lot of time going forward.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fantastic. It's actually funny and interesting timing. Just yesterday I was talking with a guy named Micah Topping, and he's been working on a bunch of Pattern Lab stuff as well, but also doing just a lot of stuff with JSON and sort of working with Json Schemas. And so he was schooling me on that yesterday, and basically it looks exactly the same as as you scroll up, where it's like you have your event and you're basically saying, here's the schema for this particular kind of content, and you could set certain things to true, false, required, not required, this is an array and this is a whatever, and that allows sort of that same that same automated testing to basically say like, hey, is the system providing this? Is the content management system providing the data in the way that we need it? Yes or no? And if it's not, then you can sort of go in and dive into it. So I totally agree with you that instead of just the sort of feeling around in the dark that a lot of QA people had to do back in the day, it's like, here's this opportunity to sort of let the machines do some of this and make sure that everything is mapping, that the UI is mapping to the content and vice versa.
Yeah, no, I think the enormous amount that the system already knows about your site. I think at this point we just kind of want to leverage some of that. Like there's just so much stuff that we've poured into templates and these placeholder data files that tell us a lot more about the site than I think we're aware of, and I think being able to dig into that and use that as a sort of leverage against, again, stop repeating ourselves, trying to streamline the process. And actually, this goes back to the sort of siloed developers, or at least the people being able to work independently of each other, that as long as we maintain these boundaries where these two things match up, these two puzzle pieces match up, everything that connects to those on either side should be fine. We just have to worry about the places where one person's work starts to cross over into another person's work, and this is one of those ways that we make sure that those mesh up.
That's really cool. That's definitely... This is all sort of surreal actually in a way, because this is all stuff I've had in my mind where as sort of more a front end person, I'm just going, it'd be really cool to just be able to give them something that, give the people that are actually plugging this into a back end system, to be able to give them what they need, and not just a hint at it, but actually literally giving them the stuff that they could latch onto. And it looks like you have all done it. You've actually made it work, so that's really cool.
Yeah. Cool.
So cool. So lab coat. So just go over, I guess, like sort of high level again, like what exactly it does. Like I get that it's sort of like matching. It's sort of creating a bridge. Is that safe to say, or how are you?
Yeah. So I think the impetus was to just have something that we could where all the functionality of Pattern Lab that we needed was in the vendor library.
Okay.
So it wasn't kind of mingled in, but when we started
and just to riff on that for a moment, like where the patterns, the atoms, the molecules, all the little template files and pieces of CSS and HTML, those can all be in your repo, structured how you want them. But the actual Pattern Lab part itself can get included through like Composer and Packagist and slurped in when you run a build, so that things can kind of be structured inside out. Is that, Matt, a fair way to summarize?
Yeah, I can pull up, I think, this is the old site. So we started on a project where we were using lab code, and now back to where I started, and we kind of, in the same way that we had Pattern Lab as a kind of top-level directory, we started thinking about, well, on these sites, especially the CMS sites, there's a lot of things that are used all over the place. So we're starting to think about, well, what if our templates directory was a top-level directory? What if all the site assets were in an asset directory that was a top-level directory? What are the things that are really most important to the site? I'm going to find it one of these days. Let me see. Is this it? No, there's no. Anyway, I'll keep talking. So I think with the next generation of it, we really started to think about, can we make the repo just the things that are completely unique to this project? And how much common code can we push to stuff that's handled by a package manager? Like, as much as possible, we wanted to have our repos be really light, be really dedicated to the project at hand. And this is a part of that. We might have a winner here. Woohoo! Okay, so here we go, yeah. So in this case, I think we may have been doing work on development. We have, like, all of our assets are now top-level items because we use them everywhere. We're no longer varying things in themes. You know, we're doing, these sites are almost entirely design-focused and handcrafted, so our templates and our asset files, our styles, all those are going to bubble up, and a lot more of those are going to be top-level things. In Pattern Lab,
the whole Pattern Lab isn't checked into the repo. The whole Pattern Lab here is included in a build and gets downloaded and dropped in, right?
Yeah, so our Pattern Lab directory just contains the patterns, and it contains any files that are needed for the style sheet. And we try to keep it that small. Those are the things that will change from project to project. Almost everything else we keep the same. So we try to move that stuff to our lab code file. So that's where a lot of that stuff resides now. The things that build the style guide, that allow us to render it. Yeah, we can take a look at the composer file right here. It loads lab code and outposts.
Yep.
And loading lab code then gets what it needs from Pattern Lab.
It grabs Twig, it grabs, so we're using, that's a good point. We are using the Pattern Lab UI. So when this builds, and we can take a look at the lab code composer file, we are using, the Pattern Lab style guide, and we're using Twig. And because we love the UI, it's fantastic. That was something we absolutely didn't want to give up. We kind of wanted to integrate it into our process a little bit more and hopefully make it, because the other thing is that since we use Grunt so heavily, a lot of the things that Pattern Lab was building for us, we didn't need. We really just needed it to compile the style guide. And in terms of moving assets over or minifying scripts and styles, we were perfectly comfortable letting Grunt do that.
Yeah, and that's certainly been part of so basically what's been going on with us. Dave and I have been working on the new version and are sort of hitting on it. It's really cool sort of to see you've all just more or less taken matters into your own hands. But that's sort of one of the things that we've been hearing from a lot of different people is that people are saying, I want to use this tool, but I'm using this stuff. I'm using Grunt for handling all this other stuff, and me myself, I'm doing that as well. And so we're actually sort of taking a step back with the new version and sort of like, other tools like Grunt and Gulp and whatever, they're sort of handling that. But then also like the pattern engine, it's like, you're all using Twig. Other people, I'm still using Mustache. Other people are like, where's Handlebars? Where's Jade? Where's blah, blah, blah? Where's everything? There's so many different languages out there. And as you've shown, you're able to do really sophisticated stuff whenever Pattern Lab is matched up or really tightly coupled with the templating language of the content management system. So for example, Drupal 8 is using Twig, and so if you're writing your stuff in Pattern Lab in Twig, it becomes that much easier to, even if you're not doing the as sophisticated stuff as you're all doing, at least it's sort of in this similar format where you're not going to have to rewrite it all just to get it into the content management system. So that's been a big sort of what we've been doing with this new version is sort of decoupling things. So it's like, if you like the UI and if you like the default patterns that it gives you, that's cool. You could use those. But if you want to use a different templating engine, cool, go for that. And the idea is to hopefully, build sort of these different starter kits, wherever we can. It's like, oh, here's Pattern Lab with bootstraps stuffed inside it. Here's Pattern Lab with foundations stuffed inside it. Here's one with like the kitchen sink in it, and it's doing like literally everything. But then here's one that's totally blank, or here's one that's just sort of very minimal. So the idea is to really make the tool a lot more flexible, so that more people can make use of it and make use of the things that they feel are helpful, and leave behind the things that maybe they don't need.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of caused our. There's a little bit of a confusion sometimes when we talk about Pattern Lab, because we use it to mean, I think, some things and mean other things at other times. Sometimes when we talk about Pattern Lab, we're just talking about those collection of templates, the patterns that we've made for
all
this.
the atoms and molecules.
Yeah. Other times we're talking specifically about the UI that we use to test stuff. Like, let's take a look at it in Pattern Lab and see if it'll break.
All right.
It is kind of, I noticed even in the short time that we've been using it, that it's sometimes what we're talking about means different things at different times.
Yeah. Yeah, it is always very fascinating. And just even, a lot of the language that I've been using, things like atoms, molecules, organisms, it's just really funny. The more I travel around, the more I talk to folks, the more I see how people work. So long as you're all able to understand each other, that's all that matters. I keep telling people that, because some people like to get really pedantic with me with, why did you call it atoms and molecules? Why didn't you call it elements and blocks and blah? And I'm just like, don't worry about it. You're stressing yourself out. Don't do that. just use whatever language makes the most sense for you and your team. And yeah, like you do, especially whenever you sort of have. I could see how it can be a little confusing, because you're sort of using Pattern Lab in sort of pretty sophisticated ways. So there's a lot of different layers that are going on, and you're sort of all referencing them with the same name. So I can see how that could be confusing for sure.
Yeah, well, I think that, so the last project we had 3 different categories of things that the words were all pretty much synonymous. We had components and elements and some other thing that could never figure out, are elements made of components, or do components make up elements, or couldn't have. So I think, just having a standard language, I think, has helped. Just deciding these are called atoms, these are called molecules.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, before, I know it's 10 till here, but before our time's up, a bit about your book, Atomic Design, and about, you're writing it, and it's like, you're putting it out as you write it, which is cool. Have you thought about how do atomic designs live once they're in production, and once there's a live site, and it's the ongoing evolution of the atomic design?
Yeah. And I think that a lot of what you're showing really helps prove, that there is a life after this. So historically, you guys still there? Did I lose you? I might have just lost you. Burp, burp, burp. You guys there?
Uh-oh,
Hey-o.
we might have lost you there for a sec.
Yeah.
Maybe internet glitch.
Okay.
The Pixo team is still here. Brad,
All
can you
right.
hear us?
Excellent. Yeah, I can see. Yep, I can see you and all that now. So.
Oh, now we're back. Now we can hear you. Can you hear us? Okay.
Okay. Yeah. I'm getting some feedback. Maybe your end. The volume being up pretty loud. Maybe. But yeah. I mean, I think back to your question about sort of these atomic design systems living on well after they've been created. That's why it's really fantastic to talk to you all, and to sort of go in. I've been into a couple other places where they've actually done a great job at making it not just a deliverable or not just a prototyping tool or not just something to make the initial front end and then you plug it into WordPress or Drupal or whatever other CMS, and then the pattern lab just sort of dies. It just goes away. It becomes obsolete or whatever. There's a tremendous opportunity to sort of create these living, breathing design systems. Organizations like Lonely Planet, they've created their own sort of custom system that they call Rizzo. And it's like, yeah, they have their production environment and their style guide, their pattern library totally in sync. And that if you make a change to one molecule, right, if you're making a change to this one little pattern, that's going to propagate out anywhere that pattern is included in their live production environment. And that is the huge opportunity right there. So thanks. But yeah, I think that's the huge opportunity. And again, what Dave and I have been focused on with this new version is trying to make the tool as flexible as possible so that, again, people can use the languages, the templating engines, the whatever, YAML markdown in addition to JSON and stuff like that. Whatever sort of is more comfortable or more, how they're set up, we want to be able to have the tool be as flexible as possible so that they could do things like you're doing, which is launching sites, having these things sort of very much married together so that Pattern Lab becomes the part of the workflow. It becomes, instead of going, oh, we need to make a change to the site, you don't, leapfrog over the pattern library and into the production environment, and then all of a sudden the pattern library just becomes obsolete and outdated and gets ignored, and it's like, let's just burn it to the ground. And I've seen that happen a million times. And in fact, my own projects, the ones that I've been handing off to clients because they don't work at their organizations, and unfortunately our project scopes weren't sophisticated enough wherever it's like, okay, we're going to spend a couple weeks to sort of get Pattern Labs set up on your end and sort of spend the time to try to bridge these things together. It was sort of like, here's your website, and but have a good day. Have fun with that. And unfortunately, I see that as a tremendously big missed opportunity. And so that's why it's so exciting seeing what you're all doing, because you're actually bringing our aspirations to fruition. So it's really cool.
Maybe. Okay.
We're back.
One final question I wanted to also ask is, a couple years ago I heard a talk, it was 4 years ago, from Lou Rosenfeld, the guy who wrote that book.
Information Architect. The Polar Bear book, yeah.
The Polar Bear book by O'Reilly. And his whole mantra for about a year there was, redesign is dead, or redesign must die, and that we should stop redesigning websites at all, and they should just be incrementally improved one little bit at a time. And 4 years have gone by, and I guess I feel like in our business, redesign is alive and well, whether we like it or not. But maybe we're starting with some of this stuff to get the tools that redesign finally can die. Yeah. So I wondered what you thought about redesign and its future.
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head, where I think that with tools like Pattern Lab, with establishing pattern libraries and design systems and all of that stuff, what we're doing is we're laying a foundation so that even when the time comes, wherever 4 years down the line or whatever, the university comes back and goes, oh, this design is horrible or whatever. We like to do that because we just get bored with it. It doesn't mean that you need to burn everything to the ground and start from scratch, because whenever you do a big redesign, even if it was just a tremendous, huge aesthetic overhaul, UX overhaul, you're still going to have things like buttons. You're still going to have things like tabs and form fields and image types and hero images and all the UI components that are currently making up the site. So I do think that you're totally right and Lou's right that this notion of redesigns, these big honking redesigns where we just sort of burn everything to the ground and say, well, no, we're going to do it right this time. I think that what we're all doing right now with this pattern-based design development and more or less philosophy mentality is where we're paving the way to do incremental, or sometimes maybe even not so incremental, big changes to a design system. That doesn't necessarily mean, in order to make those changes, you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? We don't have to burn the whole design system down in order to make, again, sometimes radical changes to the design. So that personally makes me really excited.
I think the flip side of it is, though, that the philosophy makes it incredibly easy, theoretically, to swap out the design entirely. That if the content is the same, if they love WordPress, and they're not going to change a thing about how WordPress is set up, as long as you use those same content shapes, you could theoretically lift one pattern lab out and drop another one in with almost no disturbance.
Yeah. Right. So it's like redesign is easier, or redesign is possible, or something.
Yeah.
But I'd consider that to be a positive. That's an opportunity that wasn't previously available, right? And that always troubles me whenever people couple in a redesign with a replatforming of a CMS and stuff. It just seems like such a bad idea. They're sort of two different projects altogether. But yeah, so I sort of see this foundation enabling a whole lot of things. Again, the ability to do A/B testing. I talk to a lot of organizations, and they're just not at a place. They're constantly sort of struggling, trying to keep up and trying to stay modern or whatever. And by establishing these pattern libraries, by having sort of a sophisticated system like you were just showing me, here comes this opportunity to say, well, maybe we should try tabs here, or this other sort of UI, treatment, rather than the way it currently is, and we can run an A/B test, and we could say, okay, this UI pattern is performing better than the other. So you can make more deliberate, educated sort of decisions once you have a system like this in place, and I think that is just, again, sort of lends itself to that whole like death to the redesign, the big honkin' redesign, just burn it all down and piss off all your users in the process. So.
Yeah, totally. And like you said too, having a clear API for your content and sort of using your content as if it were a service or as if it were an API lets you change out the CMS too. So by having a simple little WordPress installation with just a few things and serving up some JSON, it's really easy then to say like, oh, well, when it's time to upgrade WordPress or upgrade Drupal or switch out to a new CMS, it's much easier because the CMS isn't the be-all and the end-all powering everything. The CMS is just the little content engine, and as long as you replace it with the next version and it spits out the JSON content that you need, then you can work on that component without having to tear apart and rebuild the entire machine.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. I think that is a tremendous opportunity. And again, seeing how much money gets thrown around, people migrating CMSs and stuff, it's like, holy smokes, you're talking about tremendous amounts of money and time and effort saved by sort of having, like a thinner CMS rather than one that's trying to do everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think all of this is just tremendously exciting for us when we see just, I don't know, I keep coming back to how hard I thought this was going to be and how easy it ended up being, and it makes you want to reach a little bit further with the next one.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Well, that makes me really happy. Thanks so much for taking the time to show me this. This is very certainly really exciting for me, and again, it's just really cool to see you all executing things that have been sort of in my mind. You're actually doing it, so that's sort of validating and vindicating, I think, for me. But also just really exciting, and I'm happy to hear that you're all happy that you're finding it effective as well.
Yeah, totally. And validating for us to know like we're using Pattern Lab in the ways that the whole industry and kind of the shift of the ways we work makes sense for a lot of people, not just ourselves. So
Yeah.
it's good to hear.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, definitely keep me posted on the progress of LabCoat and Outpost and any new projects or something that you're rolling out, or and certainly would be happy to sort of keep the conversation going.
Yeah, totally. Us too. We'll keep following what's up with Pattern Lab and the book, and we'll definitely stay in touch. And yeah, we love kind of making these tools that will make other people's jobs easier and other people's workflows better. And so I was really glad we could connect, and let's stay in touch.
Awesome. All right. Hey, take care. Thanks very much, guys.
Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, Matt.
All right. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.